Howdy there, Isaac here. Today we'll be asking an interesting question. What if the hero killer Stain joined the League of Villains? It's something I'm sure many fans have pondered, since Stain was asked to join it in the anime. Unfortunately, in canon, old Stainy Boy refused the call to action the first time, and in this story, the same thing would happen. But unlike in canon, today's Stain wouldn't be regulated to just one arc. Oh no, this isn't Horikoshi Sensei writing. Today, the Master of Webs will spin a tale of blood and insanity. The story of Stain joining the League of Villains. Stain's story would go just like it did in canon, right up until the end. The Crimson villain would still be defeated by the trio of Deku, Ida, and Todoroki before giving his famous speech and making each and every one of the heroes freeze in place. There was one person who wouldn't freeze though. One who had noticed that the villain killed his Nomu. It was Shigaraki Tomura, accompanied by his caretaker, Kurogiri.
Kurogiri, do you still think that Stain would be a good fit for the League of Villains?
Shigaraki asked, his voice more curious than anything else. After Stain's speech, Shigaraki realized something. The people were affected by the killer's words. Shigaraki was very slowly realizing the possible asset that Stain could be. His name alone could possibly draw in new recruits, maybe even a healer to the party. Kurogiri would respond to Shigaraki's question, saying that he saw great potential gains for recruiting Stain. Shigaraki nodded before telling Kurogiri to open a portal to Stain. The heroes would see a large purple warp gate open behind Stain before seeing Shigaraki's hand and face pop out of it, quickly pulling in Stain and leaving with a wide smile on his face. He'd crafted the perfect headline for the news. Stain saved by the League of Villains. The duo of Shigaraki and Kurogiri would bring Stain back to their hideout, and Shigaraki would order his caretaker to bandage the hero killer. With Stain's wounds taken care of, Shigaraki would sit and wait, still getting a bit jealous that everyone was gushing over the hero killer more than the League. Luckily for him, though, the news would cover the fact that the League rescued Stain. The hero killer, meanwhile, would wake up nearly a day after his rescue, which would get a finally from Shigaraki. Tomura would walk up to the injured killer and squat down by the cot he was resting on.
I just want to talk, but if you move...
Tomura picked up his hand and placed it on the injured Stain's cot, leaving his middle finger off of it.
I'll kill you.
The hero killer would grit his teeth, greatly angered that he was being held hostage like this. Remember, Shigaraki has no diplomatic skills here, and still has very little conviction.
We rescued you because we know you can help grow the League. And like you said, we both agree that the society needs to change. So how about we form a temporary alliance, help each other to further our goals. You get to kill the fake heroes you hate, and I'll get to further my plans to kill All Might, using you as our mascot.
Stain would grunt before speaking.
And why would I do that? Oh, if you don't want to join, we could always return you to the heroes, effectively ending your hero-killing career.
This angered Stain greatly. Being at the mercy of this brat was almost more infuriating than letting that vengeful student get away. If only he hadn't gotten tunnel vision when fighting those UA brats. Stain would remember the fight, and remember Izuku. If Shigaraki were to attack UA again, that future hero could potentially be in danger. And if the League wanted him so badly, maybe he could use himself as a bargaining chip of sorts.
Alright, I'll join, as long as you don't hurt that green-haired, plain-looking brat at UA, and don't kill All Might while I'm a part of your little league.
If this worked, Stain could maybe keep these two true heroes alive. Shigaraki would frown, disliking the fact that Stain was daring to even try bargaining. Kurogiri would notice Shigaraki's killing intent, quickly coming in to whisper in his ear. The caretaker would tell Shigaraki that it wasn't that big of a compromise, that they could still use Stain as they saw fit, then get rid of him once they had enough members. Shigaraki would agree before telling Stain that they had a deal, getting up and walking away shortly after, leaving Stain to rest in his room. As the days went by, Stain would be left to recover in his room, just as Shigaraki was left to figure out his convictions, which would go just like in canon, only happening weeks earlier, meaning no hostage Deku at the mall. The only major change is the worry of the public. The news would constantly talk about the growing threat of the League, though this wouldn't change too much, other than putting a bit more pressure on UA to keep their students safe. Though the news would start reporting on Hero Society and the fact that the heroes failed once again to defeat and capture a villain. Like in canon, the League would end up attracting everyone it did, and once Stain came out of his room, everyone would just gush over him. Well, Toga and Spinner would. Muscular would probably also talk with Stain, gloating about the heroes he's defeated. Stain, however, would find most of these people detestable. Stain would try to keep to himself, only occasionally joining Tamura and Dabi in order to help plan for the forest raid. Stain would, at first, think that it was a bad idea to do the raid, only to change his mind when finding out that the Wild Wild Pussycats would be there. Once Stain heard that, he was game for raiding that forest. With Stain's involvement in the planning, I think he'd lead to the raid team being structured differently. With Stain there, Shigaraki would remember that Stain and he both failed because they relied on only one person. For Shigaraki, it was his original Nomu, and for Stain, it was, well, Stain himself. So Shigaraki would order that everyone would travel together in groups of 2 or more, thinking of the raid like he would a tactical game like XCOM. Stain would happily lead a team of Spinner and Magni to kill the Pussycats. Dabi would take his team of twice, like in canon, only this time including Toga. Muscular and Compress would end up being paired together since they both were supposed to capture Bakugo in canon. And finally, Mustard and Moonfish would be paired together, and can I just say what a weird flippin' team this is? Honestly, there's this 15, maybe 14-year-old teaming up with this weird BDSM-inspired murderer who's obsessed with flesh. That has to be one of the weirdest team-ups ever, but there was nobody else left, so oh well. Oh, and Stain would make sure Moonfish could actually see crap. Sorry, Moonfish, I know you're into that stuff, but you can't mix your personal and work life together. In the meantime, Stain would end up socializing with some of the League. Stain and Compress would get along well enough. The hero killer didn't like the Greatest Showman a whole lot, but they were both older fellows who took up a sort of mentor-like role. Speaking of which, the second person Stain got along with was Spinner. At first, Stain could only cringe at the lizard, but in time they got to know each other more, and Stain would end up teaching the lizard how to really wield a blade, since Spinner really only swung around all his weapons like a madman. Stain would also give Mustard a stern talking to. The little twat would end up getting on Stain's nerves, spouting all that nonsense just because he didn't get into UA. Poof. He was just a whiny little kid. To be fair, everyone kinda hated Mustard, even Shigaraki and Moonfish. Stain would start out with teaching Mustard what it really meant to have conviction, to really make a change. One that was more than just revenge for not making it into a stupid school. Once Mustard was taught that, via a couple of light beatings from Stain, the kid would slowly begin to realize what Stain was really about. So Stain would, inadvertently, end up making the League an overall better place. Stain would also end up chatting with the other members, even Kurogiri, but the rest of them were really just here for their own personal pleasures. They didn't care about really changing society, they simply were outcasts looking for a place to belong, or for safety from the police. The final person to talk about was Dabi. Stain despised the secretive villain. The hero killer knew everyone else's motives except for Dobby's, and that was dangerous. Not only that, Dobby also refused to share his real name. This kid was smart, deadly, and a complete unknown. Stain would have to watch out for this guy. Another change from canon would be the inclusion of Kurogiri in the raid. The warp villain would be in charge of looking over the battlefield and retrieving any villains who may fall in battle. Kurogiri could not aid the villains in battle, he was simply there to make sure everything went as planned and to keep the League intact. And so, we would get to the Forest Raid arc. Let's get to the Pussycats first. This battle would go much differently than in canon. Izuku would still run to save Koda, but with Mr. Compress to keep Muscular in check, the villain would end up going deeper into the forest to find his prey. Spinner, Magni, and Stain would end up absolutely decimating the Pussycats. Magni would halt Tiger, while Stain ended up paralyzing Mandalay. By this point, Izuku had run off to save Koda, and the other students had run off as well. Mandalay would go on to be stabbed through the chest by Stain, which would end up sending the Tiger into a rage. Tiger would punch Magni away before running over to engage Stain. Spinner would get in the way, attempting to protect his master, only for Tiger to grab the lizard and slam him into the ground. This would give Stain enough time to slash Tiger across the chest and paralyze him.
Revenge isn't something that looks good on a hero,
Stain would say before plunging his sword into the Tiger's chest. Stain would go over to check up on Spinner, but the lizard was a tough dude, able to somewhat shake off his injuries. Stain was happy with his work, but there were two more people he wanted to finish off. One was Ida, the student who had only revenge in his heart during their fight. The other was Todoroki, the student who was the son of Endeavor. Just thinking about that name made Stain's blood boil. He hated that damn hero, the one who took off his nose.
Come on, you two. We have a couple more targets to take out,
Stain would say as he walked off, his bloodlust on full display, which actually scared both Spinner and Magni, who cautiously followed their leader. Meanwhile, Aizawa would still be getting showered with Dobby clones, still taunting and distracting the teacher. Ida and Izuku would end up reaching the base just as Aizawa destroyed the Dobby clone. Izuku would hand Koda to Aizawa before dashing away to tell Mandalay his message, only to be stopped by the sight of Stain exiting the wooded area. Izuku's eyes widened as the idea of a dead Mandalay popped into his head. Stain raised his sword and licked his lips as he set his eyes on Ida.
Aizawa, I consider you a good hero. I won't kill you if you don't stand in my way, but that brat over there, Tenya Ida, must die.
Stain rushed forward to kill Ida, only to be stopped by Aizawa's binding cloth. The hero killer anticipated this, however, and would be revealed to also be a clone. The real Stain would reveal himself, dashing towards Aizawa with Spinner and Magni also using sneak attacks on the students. Spinner would end up knocking out the animal whisperer dude, while Magni went to pulverize Mineta. Ojiro would end up fighting Spinner, his martial arts coming in handy as he's able to dodge most of the lizard's attacks, and Ida would end up fighting Magni, only managing to survive due to his speed and maneuverability. Izuku would be torn, trying to decide whether he should help his fellow students here or go out to save the students in the forest, since he doesn't know their target is Bakugo in this timeline. Aizawa would notice this, and after kicking away Stain, would speak. Izuku, since we can't rely on Mandalay, I need you to go get Vlad. Then you and Ida are to run out there and tell all the students they are allowed to fight as long as they make their way back here. Izuku would do just that, notifying Vlad of the villains outside. Once Vlad joined the battle, Izuku and Ida would run off into the forest, leaving behind their teachers. Aizawa and Stain would be fairly even, though as time would go on, Aizawa would receive more and more cuts to his body, wearing him down over time. though he wouldn't be paralyzed since he's constantly staring at the hero killer. Vlad would be able to withstand Magne's hits, as well as dishing out a few of his own. With his quirk, he'd be able to capture Magne's top half, along with Mineta using his sticky balls to keep Magne pinned to the ground. Vlad would declare that he had his villain captured, only to hear Dobby spout out that he should keep track of his surroundings. Vlad would barely dodge the clone's flames, being badly burned on his left arm, the one that had been holding Magne in place. Magne would slowly peel Mineta's balls off their feet before getting ready to double team Vlad. Back in the forest, Mustard and Moonfish would be busy keeping each other in check. The two honestly hated each other, but knew they both have a role to play despite Moonfish attempting to run off her flesh several times. Mustard was able to keep his gas low to the ground while Moonfish used his teeth to stay high up in the air away from it. The duo would be assaulted by Tetsu Tetsu and Kendo, but honestly, they wouldn't be able to do much. Tetsu Tetsu would insist that they couldn't just retreat, but with Mustard shooting at him and Moonfish attacking him from up top, it's only a matter of time until Tetsu Tetsu gets split in half. Kendo would attempt to assault Moonfish, but his teeth were just too sturdy, and by this time Moonfish is super bloodlusted, so Kendo would quickly be skewered as well. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but this man was able to swing himself just as easily as Spider-Man, so he could easily dodge and outmaneuver these two, and really that's that. Moonfish and Mustard just make too good of a team, funnily enough. There is one pretty interesting change, however. Tokoyami would never go out of control, and thus Shoji and Tokoyami would meet up with Todoroki and Bakugo. This dream team would end up directly in the path of Izuku and Ida. While they make a bigger squad, they aren't as on edge, thus they definitely don't notice this giant blonde Hulk stalking them in the trees. Toga and a Dabi clone would encounter Sue and Ochako. Just like in canon, Toga would get some blood from Ochako while Dabi holds off Sue, not killing her simply because Toga begged him not to, saying that they were friends. The escort team ends up stumbling upon this scene, only for Muscular to jump them. Unfortunately, Compress could only hold off the Hulk's bloodlust for so long. The following battle would be interesting. The Dabi clone would realize that this wasn't good and yell out to finish the mission, hinting at the hidden Compress to do his job. Meanwhile, firing off a large spout of fire, only barely being blocked by Shoto's ice wall. Compress would use this chaos as an opportunity, quickly capturing Bakugo as well as Tokoyami, who is actually holding off Muscular with his powered-up Dark Shadow. Compress would glow in front of the students, like in canon, with Toga saying that they captured Bakugo over their communicators. Luckily for everyone there, Dabi would end up yelling at them to get out of there. Muscular and Compress would be displeased that their fun was cut short, but all four would end up retreating nonetheless. Back at the camp, Stain was clashing with the tiring Aizawa, while Vlad was being beaten into the ground by Magni. The Dabi clone had attempted to kill Vlad, but Magni kept getting in the way, so there wasn't much he could do other than watch. Spinner and Ojiro were still pretty tied. Yeah, Spinner, sorry, you're still sorta weak compared to everyone else. But you can just tell everyone Ojiro was super strong or something. Before anyone could die, the trio plus one clone would get the signal that Bakugo was captured, and thus the trio would retreat, staying doing so begrudgingly. Aizawa would attempt to stop the villains, only for the Dabi clone to cover the villains' trail with fire, completely cutting them off. Back in the forest, Compress and Muscular were having trouble retreating, even though Toga had completely lost her pursuers. The Dabi clone had also burst into flames to cover their path, but Shoto had quickly cleared the flames with his ice. Luckily, Mustard and Moonfish were already at the rendezvous point, and once Compress was in view, the two would provide cover fire for their comrades. Izuku still concocts his plan to launch himself, Shoji, and Todoroki at Compress, which goes down just like in canon, up until they land. Muscular would instantly start fighting Izuku, while Todoroki focuses on the real Dabi, trying to keep his flames from hurting anyone else, which would cause Todoroki to notice a few things about the flame user. For some reason, Dabi wasn't able to fire off as many flames as his clone could. Maybe he overheated quickly? Unfortunately, Todoroki wasn't able to think of a plan as Dabi quickly fired off another bout of flames. Shoji would try to do something against Moonfish, but yeah, that's a losing battle. Ida would fight off twice and nearly get bisected by his measuring tape. This little scrap would be interrupted by Stain stepping onto the battlefield. The hero killer would instantly paralyze Ida and Shoji, with Todoroki and Izuku evading this fate. The engine hero would fall onto the ground, utterly defenseless. Twice would be upset that Stain stole his kill, while simultaneously congratulating Stain with his other persona. Ida would watch on as Stain put a sword over his chest. Izuku would attempt to attack the hero killer, only to be hit away by Muscular. Todoroki would also attempt to save his friend, only for his ice to be melted before reaching Ida.
Finally, I get to rid this world of this false hero.
Stain would plunge his sword into Ida, causing the student to spit up blood. Izuku would go absolutely berserk, breaking out of Muscular's grip with a 100% kick, which rocketed him towards Stain. The speed of Izuku was too much for the hero killer, who was hit with a 100% punch to the face. Kurogiri would notice how bad that this was, and instantly start to teleport members of the League away. After Compress revealed that the marbles Shoji got from him were just ice, Izuku would attempt to rush the magician, only to notice that one of his legs was broken, and he was unable to save anyone because he went overboard again. Once the villains were gone for good, Izuku would crawl towards Ida, who still had Stain's sword stuck inside him. Izuku would tell Ida to hang in there, telling him that Vlad could help coagulate the wound and that they could transport him to the hospital. Aizawa would come onto the scene and his heart would drop. Aizawa would think the same thing Izuku did, but he knew Vlad was knocked out, and no amount of first aid kits could save his student. Ida, having a sword in his chest, would end up dying within minutes, being held by Izuku and his close friends. Before Ida died, he'd ask Izuku for a favor. "Midoriya, you're a good leader. Can I trust you to make sure my brother's hero agency keeps doing good?" Izuku would tell Ida to save his strength, only to then realize Ida's breathing had stopped. All of the students around Ida would openly weep, with Aizawa watching over the all too familiar sight, feeling ashamed that he wasn't able to save his student. The cleanup would only devastate the heroes even more, with the discovery of Tiger, Mandalay, and Pixie Bob, all three heroes confirmed dead, and the discovery of Kendo and Tetsu Tetsu, in total making 3 students confirmed dead. The news and media would absolutely destroy UA for this. The public's faith in the school and even Hero Society would drop drastically, with parents quickly trying to pull their children out of school. UA and the country of Japan would fall into a bout of chaos within the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, at Villain HQ, Stain and Muscular would be resting in another room, trying to recover from their wounds. Bakugo and Tokoyami would be restrained, with a large light being shown on Tokoyami, along with Compress keeping a hand on each of them, occasionally switching out with Spinner, who held knives to the students, or Moonfish, who used his teeth as a weapon. Spinner was the most upset with these students. The Lizard would be much more harsh with them, knowing they were the reason his master was hurt. But the Lizard could rest easy, knowing that best nursed Kurogiri was taking care of Stain. Shigaraki would walk into the room, sitting down in front of the students, looking over towards Compress, who had his hands placed on their shoulders.
"Katsuki Bakugo, Fumukage Tokoyami, let's have a chat, shall we?"
But that, fam, is where we'll be leaving it off for right now. I hope you guys enjoyed this devilishly villainous video. If you did, I'd implore you to leave a like and maybe even subscribe to join our little league. Anyways, that'll be it for now. Have a good day or night wherever you are. Bye bye.